What in the goddamn hell do you think you're doing here, slick? The voice, dripping with venom and cheap authority, belonged to Markham Thorne, and it cut through the polished calm of Chicago O'Hare's first-class lounge like a rusty blade. His portly frame, stuffed into a manager's uniform that was a size too tight, blocked the path of a black man whose suit probably cost more than Thorne's monthly salary. The man, Dr. Elias Vance, stopped cold. All around them, the quiet hum of privileged travel ceased. Conversations died. Heads turned, and one by one, the smartphones came out, their dark screens gleaming like the eyes of hungry predators. "This lounge is for paying customers," Thorne snarled, his face a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He jabbed a sausage-like finger toward the distant chaos of the general terminal. "Not for some street hustler looking for a handout. Get your ass back where you belong before I have security drag you out." Elias remained perfectly still, a statue of composure in a hurricane of hate. His silence, his sheer refusal to be rattled, seemed to pour gasoline on the fire of Thorne's rage. The airport manager took a step closer, his breath sour with stale coffee and prejudice, invading Elias's personal space. "What are you, deaf? I said move it, ghetto trash." But as Elias calmly reached up to adjust the collar of his jacket, something on the lanyard around his neck caught the light. It was a glint of gold and blue, an official seal that Thorne, consumed by his racist diatribe, was too blind to see. It was a symbol of authority so far beyond his own petty kingdom that it was almost comical. It was the quiet, unassuming harbinger of the most expensive, career-ending, life-shattering mistake Markham Thorne would ever make. Have you ever watched a man's life implode in real time? Have you ever seen hatred so pure it drives someone to commit a federal crime on a dozen different cameras? Because that's exactly what was about to happen. What those passengers, with their phones held high, didn't know was that this public humiliation was just the opening act. Thorne had been planning something far darker, far more sinister than just verbal abuse. Let me ask you something before we go any further. What's the worst abuse of power you've ever witnessed? Drop a comment below because I guarantee this story is going to make your blood boil. And while you're at it, hit that like button and subscribe because you are not going to want to miss a single, horrifying second of what comes next. Earlier that morning, at precisely 6:15 a.m., and long before the sun had even thought about gracing the Chicago skyline, security camera 14B in a sterile, forgotten corridor of O'Hare had silently recorded Markham Thorne keying a code into the airport's evidence storage room. The timestamp would later become a nail in his legal coffin. He moved with the greasy confidence of a man who knew the system, his eyes scanning the shelves of confiscated items, the sad detritus of other people's bad decisions. He knew exactly what he was looking for. His fingers, thick and clumsy, closed around a small plastic baggie. Inside was a white powder, cocaine, seized from a cartel mule 3 weeks prior. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his manager's jacket, his lips twisting into a self-satisfied smirk. He was the guardian of this airport, the gatekeeper. In his warped mind, he wasn't committing a crime. He was preparing for a righteous cleansing. "Time to take out the trash," he muttered to the silent, watching camera, completely oblivious that he was scripting his own downfall. Meanwhile, Dr. Elias Vance had arrived at O'Hare for a purpose that was the polar opposite of Thorne's. He was a senior aviation safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, a man with 15 years of unblemished service, a man whose entire career was dedicated to protecting the lives of the flying public. In his standard issue carry-on were not drugs or weapons, but digital testing devices, precision measurement tools, and the official documentation that gave him the authority to ground every plane in the damn airport if he found a serious enough violation. Today's surprise inspection was no random audit. It had been triggered by an alarming spike in passenger complaints, whispers of discriminatory practices and profiling that had reached the highest levels of the FAA. The irony was so thick you could taste it. He had come to investigate the very disease he was about to be infected with. Thorne returned to the bustling terminal floor, the baggie of planted evidence, a hot, secret promise in his pocket. He'd done this before. Not the evidence planting. That was a new, dangerous escalation. But the harassment, the intimidation, that was his specialty. There had been complaints, of course. 3 formal grievances in the last 2 years, each one quietly buried by an airport administration that valued Thorne's iron-fisted management style over the comfort and civil rights of its passengers. The chief of security, a woman named Maria Santos, had seen the storm clouds gathering. "He's a lawsuit waiting to happen," she'd warned the airport director just last month. "He's going to create a major incident." Her words had been dismissed as oversensitivity. When Thorne's predatory gaze fell upon Elias Vance walking toward the first-class lounge, it was like every racist circuit in his brain fired at once. The expensive suit, the confident stride, the unapologetic blackness of the man. It was an affront to Thorne's entire worldview. In his twisted reality, he wasn't seeing a successful professional. He was seeing a threat, an imposter. This was his chance to prove his instincts were right, to show everyone that he, Markham Thorne, was the protector of this sacred space. "Hey, Lou," he barked at the gate agent, a young woman named Jennifer, who was prepping for the 8:30 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. "Keep an eye on that guy. We might have a situation." Jennifer glanced over, her brow furrowed in confusion. She saw a distinguished-looking man with a professional briefcase. Nothing about him screamed situation, but Thorne was already on the move, his hand instinctively patting his jacket pocket, reassuring himself the planted evidence was still there. He had a playbook for this, a sick, practiced routine. Create a scene, manufacture a reason, escalate until his victim either fled in humiliation or gave him grounds for a more official response. Today, he had decided, would be different. Today, he was going to escalate things all the way to a felony. Elias, oblivious to the trap being laid, continued his silent, professional assessment of the terminal. He noted the placement of security cameras, the flow of passengers, the interactions between staff. From a compliance standpoint, everything seemed to be in order. But he'd already witnessed something deeply concerning. The man who had just verbally assaulted him was clearly in a position of authority, wearing an official airport management badge. Elias made a sharp mental note. Discriminatory behavior by airport staff wasn't just bad customer service. It was a serious federal violation, the kind that could lead to crippling fines and sanctions. As the first-class passengers began to board their flight, Thorne positioned himself near the gate, a wolf circling its prey. His fingers traced the outline of the plastic baggie in his pocket. "Time to clean house," he whispered to himself, his heart thudding with a cocktail of adrenaline and hate. He was utterly convinced that what he was about to do would be seen as heroic, as necessary. He had absolutely no idea that the thug he was about to frame was a federal inspector with the authority to bring the entire airport and Thorne's miserable life to a screeching halt. The morning sun streamed through the massive terminal windows as Thorne began his final approach, his hand already reaching into his pocket. The cameras were rolling. The trap was set, and Markham Thorne was about to step onto a landmine of his own creation. Thorne approached Elias with the swagger of a man who believed he was judge, jury, and executioner. What happened next would be seared into the memory cards of dozens of phones, an undeniable, high-definition record of one of the most brazen acts of evidence planting ever caught on video. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," Thorne announced, his voice booming for the benefit of the surrounding passengers. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." Elias looked up from the notes he was making, his expression a perfect mask of professional neutrality. "I'm sorry. What reports?" "I've been standing right here reviewing compliance documents." "Don't play dumb with me," Thorne sneered, stepping closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Elias. His voice was a weapon, designed to humiliate and intimidate. "I know your type. You're probably casing the joint, looking for what you can steal. Or worse." The accusation, thick with racial poison, hung in the air. The crowd of passengers grew quiet, a tangible sense of dread descending upon the gate area. Jennifer Liu, the gate agent, looked up from her computer, her face pale with discomfort. This was wrong. This was more than just Thorne being his usual asshole self. This was something else entirely. "Listen, boy," Thorne continued, his voice rising, each word a deliberate, condescending jab. "I've been working at airports for 8 years. I can spot trouble a mile away and you reek of it." Elias remained calm, but his mind was now a whirring machine of observation and analysis. This wasn't standard security protocol. This wasn't even close. This was a naked abuse of power. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your supervisor. This entire interaction seems highly irregular." Thorne let out a bark of mocking laughter. "My supervisor? I am the supervisor here, genius. Airport Operations Manager Markham Thorne. And right now, you're the problem I'm about to solve." The audience was growing. Robert Hayes, a businessman waiting for the flight to LA, had already started recording on his phone. "This doesn't look right," he whispered to his wife. "That airport guy is way out of line." More phones emerged, a small constellation of digital witnesses drawn to the unfolding drama. Thorne seemed to thrive on the attention, his chest puffing out, his sense of self-importance swelling like a cancerous tumor. "Sir, I'm going to need to search your bag," Thorne declared, his voice now taking on the theatrical tone of a man performing for a crowd. "Airport security protocols. You look like the type who might be carrying something you shouldn't be." Elias's federal training kicked into high gear. He'd been in tense situations before, but this level of overt, unapologetic profiling was something he'd only read about in training manuals. "I am happy to cooperate with all lawful security procedures," he said, his voice steady. "However, I would like to see your written authorization for this search. Standard protocol requires documented reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion?" Thorne's face twisted into a mask of mock disbelief. "How's this for reasonable suspicion? You don't belong here. You're acting nervous, and frankly, people like you are usually up to no good." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This wasn't just a security check anymore. This was a public lynching, without the rope. "I don't need authorization from someone like you," Thorne spat, jabbing his finger toward Elias's chest. "My authorization is your suspicious behavior and the fact that you are clearly in the wrong damn place. Now, open the bag, or I'll have security drag you out of here in cuffs." Just then, Security Chief Maria Santos arrived, her radio having crackled to life with a call from a concerned gate agent. She took in the scene, the crowd, the phones, Thorne's aggressive posture, and a knot of dread tightened in her stomach. This was it. This was the major incident she had warned them about. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What's the situation here?" "I've got a suspicious individual refusing to comply with a lawful security search," Thorne announced, playing his role to perfection. "Probably carrying contraband. You know how these people operate." Elias, realizing that any further resistance would only escalate the situation and compromise his own investigation, placed his carry-on bag on an empty seat. "I will comply with your request," he said, his voice ringing with clarity. "But I insist that this entire process be documented and witnessed. This interaction is highly irregular." "Oh, it'll be documented, all right," Thorne said with a smirk that would later be played on a loop in federal court. "We're going to document exactly what kind of criminal you really are." As Elias unzipped his bag, Thorne positioned himself just so. The contents of the bag were a collection of sophisticated inspection equipment, digital measurement devices, atmospheric testing apparatus, official forms bearing the FAA letterhead. To a layman, some of it might look unusual, even suspicious. Thorne's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was his moment of vindication. As Elias lifted out a device to explain its function, Thorne saw his chance. "What the hell is all this junk?" he demanded, rummaging through the bag with rough, careless hands. "Looks like a burglar's toolkit to me, or maybe some kind of drug-making equipment." "These are professional-grade testing instruments," Elias explained patiently. "I can show you the federal documentation for each one." "Documentation?" Thorne cut him off with a sneer. "Criminals always have fake documentation. That's crime 101, buddy." The humiliation was a slow, deliberate poison. Thorne was savoring every second of it, convinced he was a hero, a lone warrior protecting the innocent from a dangerous predator. And then, he made his move. "What's this?" he suddenly exclaimed, his hand darting into the bag with theatrical flair. In one swift, fluid motion, he dropped the small plastic baggie of cocaine among Elias's equipment and discovered it a millisecond later, his fingers clumsily smudging the bag to ensure his own prints would contaminate the so-called evidence. "Well, well, well," Thorne announced triumphantly, holding the baggie of white powder aloft for the entire world to see. "Look what we have here, folks. Our innocent passengers carrying drugs. Cocaine, by the looks of it." The crowd gasped. The number of recording phones doubled. Elias's face registered genuine shock. Not the shock of a guilty man being caught, but the profound disbelief of a man witnessing the impossible. A man watching reality itself being twisted into a grotesque lie. "That is not mine," Elias said, his voice firm, unwavering. "I have never seen that substance before in my life." "Sure you haven't," Thorne mocked, playing to his audience like a cheap carnival barker. "That's what they all say when they get caught red-handed. Probably thought you could smuggle this through security in your fancy briefcase, didn't you?" The planted evidence was now the star of the show. Thorne held it up like a trophy, bathing in the glow of his perceived victory. "You know what this tells me?" he continued, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "This tells me my instincts were right. I spotted you the moment you walked into my terminal, acting all high and mighty like you own the place. Well, guess what? The only place you're going to own is a jail cell." Elias's training in crisis management kept his exterior calm, but inside, his mind was a fortress of cold, hard facts, documenting every violation, every lie, every infringement of his civil rights. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the crowd of witnesses, "I need you to understand that evidence has been planted in my bag. I request an immediate documentation of the chain of custody, a field test of that substance, and a full review of all relevant security footage." Thorne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed through the gate area. "Listen to this guy. Chain of custody. Security footage. You've been watching too much TV, buddy. This isn't a TV show. This is real life. And in real life, drug dealers go to prison." The systematic humiliation continued as Thorne turned to address his captive audience. "This is exactly why we have stringent security protocols, folks," he announced, sounding like a politician at a rally. "People like this think they can just waltz into our airport and conduct their illegal business. Well, not on my watch. Not today." Officer David Carter of the airport police arrived, summoned by Thorne's earlier call. He was a seasoned cop, and his eyes quickly scanned the scene. The tense crowd, the recording phones, Thorne's manic energy. He'd seen this movie before, and it rarely ended well. "What's the situation here?" Carter asked, his voice a calm counterpoint to Thorne's hysteria. "I caught this man with a bag full of cocaine," Thorne announced proudly, still waving the planted evidence like a flag. Classic smuggling operation. He's probably got more stashed somewhere else. These people always travel in packs. Elias looked directly at Officer Carter, and his entire demeanor shifted. The calm professional was still there, but now he was overlaid with something else, something harder and more authoritative. Officer, I need to inform you that I am a federal employee conducting official business. The substance in question has been planted in my bag, and I have multiple witnesses who can attest to that fact. Witnesses? Thorne scoffed. But for the first time, a flicker of doubt, a tiny crack in his arrogant facade, appeared on his face. Nobody saw me plant anything because I didn't plant anything. You're the one with the drugs, not me. Stop trying to confuse the situation with your lies. But then, Robert Hayes, the businessman, stepped forward, his phone still held steady. Actually, he said, his voice clear and confident, I've got the whole thing on video. I saw exactly what happened, and it's all right here on my phone. The color drained from Markham Thorne's face. His moment of triumph was beginning to crumble, but his pride, his sheer, stubborn arrogance, wouldn't let him back down. I don't care what some tourist thinks he saw, Thorne blustered. The evidence speaks for itself. Drugs in his bag. Case closed. But Officer Carter was no longer looking at Thorne. He was looking at Elias, noting the expensive suit, yes, but also the man's preternatural calm, his precise language, his specific knowledge of legal and security procedures. This didn't feel like a drug dealer. Sir, Carter said to Elias, you mentioned you were a federal employee. Can you elaborate on that? I am Senior Aviation Safety Inspector Elias Vance, Federal Aviation Administration, badge number 784B, Elias replied, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. I am here conducting an unannounced compliance inspection of this facility under federal mandate. The words, Federal Inspector, FAA, Compliance Inspection, hit Markham Thorne like a physical blow. It was as if the floor had dropped out from under him, plunging him into a nightmare of his own making. In that single, horrifying moment, he realized that his career hadn't just ended. It had been spectacularly, irrevocably annihilated. The revelation that Elias was a federal inspector should have been a full stop, the end of the line for Thorne's insane crusade. But his arrogance, so deeply ingrained, so fundamentally a part of who he was, drove him to double down, to dig his own grave even deeper. A federal inspector? Thorne's laugh was brittle, forced, bordering on hysterical. Right. And I'm the King of England. You really think I'm going to fall for a pathetic line like that? He turned to Officer Carter, trying to reassert his dominance. Listen, Carter, I've been managing this airport for 8 years. I know a con artist when I see one. This guy's probably got a whole set of fake credentials, a fake ID, the whole 9 yards. These drug dealers are getting more and more sophisticated. Elias, despite the gravity of the situation, remained a pillar of calm. Officer Carter, I understand this is an unusual situation. I need to contact my direct supervisor at the FAA district office immediately. This incident is now actively interfering with a federal investigation. Federal investigation? Thorne's voice cracked, but he pressed on, fueled by desperation. What's next? You going to tell us you're with the CIA? The FBI? Give me a break. Maria Santos, the security chief, stepped closer to Officer Carter, her voice low and urgent. Sir, maybe we should just take a moment and verify his credentials before this goes any further. Verify what? Thorne snapped, turning on her. Santos, don't let him play you. I caught him red-handed with a bag of coke. That's all the verification we need. But Robert Hayes was still recording, his phone a silent, damning witness. Officer, he called out, I've got everything on video if you need to see it. The way this airport manager planted that baggie was as clear as day. Thorne spun around, his face a mottled red with fury. You don't know what you're talking about. I didn't plant anything. This drug dealer is trying to frame me now. Sir, Officer Carter said, his voice firm, directed at Thorne. I need you to calm down. We're going to sort this out by the book. But Thorne was beyond reason. He was spiraling, his authority being openly challenged, his actions being recorded, his entire reality crashing down around him. I am calm, he shouted, a vein throbbing in his temple. I'm the one trying to protect this airport from criminals, and everyone here is acting like I'm the problem. Elias spoke again, his voice cutting through Thorne's tantrum like a surgeon's scalpel. Officer Carter, I am now going to provide you with my supervisor's direct line. Her name is Director Sarah Martinez, FAA Western Great Lakes Region. She can verify my identity and my mission here in under 5 minutes. The specificity of the information, the name, the title, the region, gave Officer Carter pause. This wasn't the rambling of a cornered criminal. This was the precise language of a professional. You know what? Thorne said, his voice laced with a desperate last-ditch defiance. Even if you are some kind of federal employee, that doesn't change the fact that you had drugs in your bag. Maybe you're a dirty fed. Maybe this is some kind of inside job. The accusation was so wild, so outrageous, that several passengers in the crowd audibly gasped. Jennifer Liu, the gate agent, looked utterly mortified by her boss's meltdown. Mr. Thorne, she said quietly, maybe we should just— Stay out of this, Liu, Thorne barked, his eyes wild. I don't need advice from a gate agent on how to handle a major security threat. Elias's patience was superhuman, but his next words carried the unmistakable chill of legal authority. Officer Carter, I must now formally inform you that interference with a federal inspector in the performance of their official duties is, in itself, a federal crime. At this point, I am requesting immediate contact with my supervisor and the full documentation of every action that has been taken here this morning. Documentation? Thorne laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Fine. Let's document it all. Document how I caught a drug dealer who's now trying to hide behind a set of fake federal credentials. But Officer Carter was already dialing the number Elias had provided. As he put the phone to his ear, Thorne made his final, most catastrophic decision. You know what? I don't care if you claim to be the Pope himself. The evidence is the evidence. He waved the planted baggie in the air like a madman. Drugs in your bag. End of story. Carter, arrest him. Sir, Officer Carter said carefully, his eyes fixed on Thorne. I think we need to verify. I'm ordering you to arrest him. Thorne's voice echoed through the now silent terminal. I am the airport operations manager, and I am telling you this man is a drug dealer and a threat to this facility. For the first time, Elias showed a flicker of emotion. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to pity. Mr. Thorne, he said quietly, you are making this situation so much worse for yourself. Worse for me? Thorne's voice was reaching a fever pitch. You're the one going to prison, buddy. You and whatever cheap little scam you're trying to run. But Officer Carter was already speaking into the phone. Yes, ma'am? Yes, I understand. Within moments, the clear, authoritative voice of FAA Director Sarah Martinez could be heard through the phone's speaker. Inspector Vance is conducting an unannounced compliance review under federal mandate. I repeat, any interference with his duties constitutes a federal crime. I am on my way to your location now. The color drained completely from Thorne's face. The blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice. The reality of his situation was no longer a creeping dread. It was a tidal wave, crashing down on him with crushing force. But even then, his ego, his pathetic, stubborn pride, refused to let him accept what was happening. This is impossible, he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the phone in Officer Carter's hand. This can't be real. Oh, but it was real. And Markham Thorne, in his blind, racist rage, had just committed multiple federal crimes, on camera, in front of dozens of witnesses, against a senior inspector from the Federal Aviation Administration. His career wasn't just over. His life as he knew it was about to be utterly and completely dismantled. The phone call with Director Martinez wasn't Thorne's wake-up call. It was his eulogy. The moment his world didn't just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Inspector Vance," Director Martinez's voice cut through Officer Carter's phone speaker, sharp and clear as a diamond. "What is your current status? We've been anticipating your preliminary report." Elias took the phone, his movements as calm and deliberate as ever. "Director Martinez, this is Inspector Vance, badge 784B. I am currently being illegally detained by airport personnel who have planted what they believe to be narcotics in my official inspection equipment." Thorne's face cycled through a rapid series of emotions. Raw disbelief, sputtering confusion, and then a last desperate lurch into denial. "This is a fake," he announced to the crowd, his voice shrill. "He's got accomplices. This is all a setup." But Director Martinez's next words sliced through Thorne's delusions like a laser. "Inspector Vance, you are authorized to complete your compliance review immediately. Officer Carter, this is Director Sarah Martinez, Federal Aviation Administration. Inspector Vance is conducting an unannounced safety and security inspection under Federal Mandate 14, CFR, Part 139. Any further interference with his duties constitutes a federal crime." The authority in her voice was absolute, unmistakable. Officer Carter instinctively straightened his posture, his training recognizing the sound of genuine federal command. "Ma'am, we have a situation here," he began. "I'm aware," Martinez replied, her tone curt. "I am dispatching additional federal investigators to your location immediately. Preserve all evidence, secure all witnesses, and document everything." "And Officer Carter," she added, her voice dropping to an icy calm, "you are to arrest anyone, and I mean anyone, who continues to interfere with Inspector Vance's duties." Thorne's legs felt like they were about to buckle. The small baggie of planted cocaine in his hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his conviction gone, his voice a hollow whisper. Elias calmly reached into his jacket and retrieved his official FAA credentials, the very same credentials Thorne had been too blinded by his own prejudice to even ask for. The badge was unmistakable. The official federal agency seal, the professional photograph, and the name Inspector Elias Vance printed in bold, clear letters. "As I was attempting to explain," Elias said, his voice a model of professional restraint, "I am here conducting a compliance inspection of your airport's security protocols. Specifically," he added, letting the words land with devastating precision, "I was here to investigate recent reports of discriminatory treatment of passengers." The irony was so thick, so perfect, that it struck the crowd of onlookers like a physical blow. The federal inspector sent to investigate discrimination had just been subjected to the most flagrant act of discrimination imaginable by the very man who was likely the subject of the investigation. Maria Santos stared at the badge, her mind reeling. "Inspector Vance, we had no idea. Mr. Thorne never mentioned any kind of federal inspection." "It was an unannounced inspection," Elias explained patiently. "That is standard operating procedure to ensure an authentic assessment of a facility's day-to-day operations." Thorne was still clutching the planted evidence, his hand trembling uncontrollably now. But you had drugs," he stammered. "I found drugs in your bag." Elias's expression remained professional, but a glint of steel entered his voice. "Mr. Thorne, what you are holding is not cocaine. It is an industrial-grade testing powder used for the calibration of our contraband detection equipment. It is standard FAA inspection material, clearly labeled as such in my official kit." Officer Carter took the baggie and examined it more closely, and there, in tiny print that Thorne had missed in his rush to frame an innocent man, was the label. FAA testing compound, not for unauthorized use. Jesus Christ, Robert Hayes, the businessman, said from the crowd, his phone still recording. He tried to frame a federal inspector with the inspector's own damn testing materials. The revelation sent a shockwave through the gathered passengers. Thorne hadn't just planted evidence. He had unknowingly planted a piece of official federal inspection equipment and tried to pass it off as illegal drugs. It was a blunder of such epic, catastrophic proportions that it was almost unbelievable. Thorne's world was spinning, a dizzying vortex of failure and disgrace. I didn't know, he mumbled. He looked suspicious. Suspicious how? Elias asked, his voice quiet but sharp as a razor's edge. What was it exactly that made me look suspicious to you, Mr. Thorne? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Everyone in that terminal knew the answer, but forcing Thorne to say it, to admit the ugly truth out loud, would be the final nail in his coffin. You were in the first-class area, and you... Thorne's voice trailed off as he realized there was no exit, no way to finish that sentence without admitting to naked racial profiling. I was what, Mr. Thorne? Elias pressed, his voice calm but relentless. Please, finish your sentence. Thorne's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. There was no explanation, no justification that wouldn't be a confession of racial bias, evidence planting, and a host of other federal crimes. Jennifer Liu, the gate agent, finally stepped forward, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and moral outrage. Inspector Vance, I want to formally apologize on behalf of the airport. Mr. Thorne's behavior is completely and utterly unacceptable. Ma'am, Elias replied, with a quiet dignity, your apology is appreciated. But this is no longer about a personal offense. This is about a systemic violation of federal aviation safety protocols and United States civil rights law. Maria Santos, her mind racing, was already connecting the dots. A look of horror spread across her face. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You took evidence from the storage room this morning. I have the access logs. You signed in at 6:15 a.m. Thorne's face went ashen. The security chief had just drawn a direct, undeniable line from his early morning trip to the evidence room to the planted cocaine. I was just checking inventory, he stammered, the lie sounding weak and pathetic even to his own ears. Checking inventory? Maria's voice was incredulous. You removed evidence from an active case file and planted it on a federal inspector during a compliance audit. The full, terrifying scope of Thorne's crimes was becoming clear to everyone present. Tampering with evidence, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, gross violations of civil rights. The charges were mounting by the second. Elias began to remove the items from his bag, each piece clearly marked with federal identification numbers. This, he said, holding up a device, is a digital measurement tool for runway surface friction testing. This is an atmospheric pressure calibration unit. This is the documentation for compliance verification. Every single item that Thorne had deemed suspicious was standard-issue federal inspection gear, the very equipment that kept millions of passengers safe every year. Inspector Vance, Officer Carter said, his voice now formal and respectful. I sincerely apologize for the delay. You are, of course, free to continue your inspection. Mr. Thorne, you need to come with me. Wait, Thorne's voice cracked with desperation. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to protect the airport. Protect it from what? Elias asked, his voice calm and devastating. From a federal safety inspection designed to keep your passengers safe? Thorne had no answer. His own racist assumptions had led him to attack the very person whose job it was to ensure the safety and security of his airport. He had committed multiple federal crimes in a deranged attempt to stop an inspection that would have ultimately improved his facility's operations. Director Martinez's voice came crackling over Officer Carter's radio. "Inspector Vance, federal agents are en route to your location. Complete your inspection and document everything. Mr. Thorne, and any supervisors who enabled his behavior, will be the subject of a full and thorough federal investigation." As the first wave of federal agents began to arrive on the scene, their dark suits and serious expressions a stark contrast to the chaos, Markham Thorne finally, truly, understood the magnitude of his catastrophe. He hadn't just lost his job. He had committed federal crimes against a federal inspector while actively interfering with national aviation safety protocols. The man he had tried to humiliate and frame was now going to complete his inspection, professionally and thoroughly. The evidence Thorne had planted would be tested, analyzed, and traced directly back to him. The security footage would show his premeditation, and Dr. Elias Vance, the thug Thorne had tried to destroy, would write the official federal report that would ensure this never, ever happened to anyone else again. Thorne's career was over. His freedom was in jeopardy, and his victim was about to make the entire aviation system safer for everyone. Within 90 minutes of Director Martinez's phone call, the polished floors of Chicago O'Hare had transformed from a travel hub into a federal crime scene. FBI agents from the Civil Rights Division, seasoned investigators from the FAA, and high-level officials from the Department of Transportation descended on the terminal, turning Thorne's moment of racist triumph into the epicenter of a full-scale federal investigation. Special Agent Rebecca Walsh of the FBI arrived first, a woman whose calm demeanor did little to mask the steely intensity in her eyes. She surveyed the scene with the practiced gaze of someone who had investigated hate crimes across the nation. "Inspector Vance," she said, extending a hand. "Agent Walsh, FBI. I understand you've been the victim of evidence tampering and a violation of your civil rights." Elias shook her hand, his composure still intact. "Agent Walsh, thank you for the rapid response. I have multiple witnesses, hours of security footage, and the physical evidence of the crimes committed here this morning." Thorne, who had been standing in a state of shocked silence under Officer Carter's watchful eye, suddenly found his voice again, a pathetic bleat of defiance. "Crimes? What crimes? I was doing my job. I was protecting the airport." Agent Walsh turned to study Thorne with the cold, dispassionate assessment of a federal prosecutor sizing up her prey. "Mr. Thorne, I presume, you are under arrest for evidence tampering, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, and violation of civil rights under color of authority." "Civil rights violations?" Thorne's voice cracked. "I never violated anyone's civil rights. I treated him exactly like I'd treat any other suspicious individual." "Suspicious how?" Agent Walsh asked, pulling out a digital recorder. "Please, explain to me, in detail, exactly what made Inspector Vance appear suspicious to you." Thorne's mouth opened and closed as the walls of the trap slammed shut around him. Any answer he gave would be a confession of racial profiling. He was in the wrong area," he stammered weakly. "The first-class boarding area." Agent Walsh consulted the notes on her tablet. "According to our records, Inspector Vance was traveling on a first-class ticket, purchased by the Federal Aviation Administration for his official travel. He was, in fact, exactly where he was supposed to be." The revelation landed like a body blow. Not only was Elias a federal inspector, but he was a legitimate first-class passenger. Every single one of Thorne's assumptions was not just wrong, but criminally, demonstrably wrong. Maria Santos approached Agent Walsh, carrying a thick file folder, her face grim. "Agent Walsh, I've pulled Mr. Thorne's complete personnel file. There have been 17 formal complaints filed against him for discriminatory behavior in the past 3 years. Airport administration buried most of them." 17? Agent Walsh's eyebrows shot up as she began to flip through the documents. And what disciplinary action was taken in response to these complaints? Verbal counseling, Maria replied, her voice thick with disgust. Management said his aggressive security approach was a valuable asset to the airport. They actually promoted him twice during that period. The file was a damning indictment of a system that had not only tolerated but rewarded bigotry. Complaint after complaint from passengers of color, all telling the same story: racial profiling, baseless searches, verbal harassment, and tactics of intimidation. All of it documented. All of it ignored. This passenger here, Agent Walsh read from one complaint, describes being called boy and having his personal belongings scattered across the floor during a bag search. Does that sound familiar, Mr. Thorne? Thorne's face went pale. He remembered the incident. He remembered feeling powerful, justified. Now it was just another piece of evidence in a federal case against him. Director Martinez arrived with her own team of FAA investigators, her expression thunderous. She was accompanied by Dr. Kenneth Roberts from the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, a man whose mere presence signaled that this investigation had reached the highest echelons of federal transportation security. "Inspector Vance," Director Martinez said, her first concern for her subordinate. "Are you injured? Do you require any medical attention?" "No, ma'am, I'm fine," Elias replied. "But I need to brief you immediately on what I've observed. The security protocols at this facility are fundamentally compromised." Thorne couldn't help himself, his arrogance flaring up one last time, like a dying ember. "Compromised? I kept this airport safe for 8 years. I know how to spot trouble. I've prevented dozens of incidents." Director Martinez turned her gaze on Thorne, looking at him as if he were a particularly disgusting insect. "Mr. Thorne, you just committed multiple federal crimes against my senior inspector while he was conducting an official safety review. Your judgment about what constitutes trouble is, quite frankly, completely and utterly worthless." Dr. Roberts stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had investigated airport security failures across the globe. "Mr. Thorne, your actions today have compromised the security of this entire facility. By targeting a federal inspector, you have demonstrated to the entire world that this airport's security apparatus is fundamentally broken." Agent Walsh, meanwhile, was reviewing the security footage with the airport's technical staff. What she found was even more devastating than the incident itself. "Mr. Thorne," she said, turning the monitor so he could see, "I need you to explain this video from 6:15 this morning, showing you removing an item from the evidence storage room." On the screen, Thorne could be seen clear as day, taking the baggie of cocaine from the evidence locker, casting a furtive glance around, and slipping it into his jacket pocket. But the footage revealed something even more sinister. "According to this timestamp," Agent Walsh continued, "you removed this evidence a full 30 minutes before Inspector Vance had even arrived at the airport. This shows clear, undeniable premeditation." Thorne's legs finally gave out, and he sagged against a counter. The footage proved he hadn't just acted impulsively. He had gone to work that morning with the intention of framing someone, anyone, who fit his racist profile. "I was checking inventory," he repeated weakly, the lie now utterly transparent. "Checking inventory?" Agent Walsh's voice dripped with sarcasm. "By removing evidence from an active criminal case and placing it in your personal clothing, is that standard inventory procedure here, Mr. Thorne?" The video evidence was a death blow, but Agent Walsh wasn't done. "This evidence locker's access log shows 17 unauthorized entries by you in the past 6 months, Mr. Thorne. How many times have you planted evidence on innocent passengers?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. "And here," she continued, fast-forwarding the footage, "we see you at 7:47 a.m., approaching Inspector Vance and deliberately placing the evidence in his bag during your manufactured search." The passengers who had witnessed the incident were now giving formal statements to FBI agents. Robert Hayes handed over his cell phone video, which showed the planting from a perfect, damning angle. But he wasn't the only one. More passengers came forward with their own recordings. The federal government now had multiple, crystal-clear angles of the same crime. Thorne was beginning to understand that his situation was far worse than just losing his job. Federal charges meant federal prison. Civil rights violations carried hefty sentences. Tampering with evidence could put him behind bars for decades. "Look," he said desperately, sweat beading on his forehead. "Maybe I made a mistake, but I honestly thought he was suspicious. I was just trying to protect people. I've always put passenger safety first." "Protect them from what?" Director Martinez asked sharply. "From a federal safety inspection? From a man whose entire job is to make air travel safer for everyone?" Dr. Roberts pulled out his own tablet, displaying data that hammered another nail into Thorne's coffin. "Mr. Thorne, I've been reviewing your detention statistics. In your 8 years here, you have initiated 247 passenger detentions. 89% of those detentions involved passengers of color. 78% resulted in no charges being filed. Do you see a pattern here?" The statistics were irrefutable. Thorne hadn't been protecting anyone. He had been systematically targeting minorities while likely letting actual security threats slip by unnoticed. Elias finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had been his shield throughout the entire ordeal. "Mr. Thorne, let me explain something to you. I have been an FAA inspector for 15 years. I have investigated airports across this country. I have seen security failures, equipment malfunctions, and operational deficiencies that could have killed hundreds of people." Thorne listened, captivated against his will, perhaps for the first time understanding the true gravity of the man he had targeted. "My job," Elias continued, "is to find problems before they become disasters. Today, I found the single biggest problem this airport has. You, your racial bias, your abuse of authority, your willingness to commit federal crimes to target people you don't like. You are not protecting anyone, Mr. Thorne. You are endangering everyone." The words hit Thorne harder than any physical blow. This wasn't just about his career anymore. This was about his entire identity. Agent Walsh was now interviewing Jennifer Liu, who was providing a devastating, tearful account of Thorne's long-standing pattern of abuse. Her testimony was being recorded for use in federal court. Other staff members, emboldened by the federal presence, were coming forward as well, adding their own stories to the growing mountain of evidence. The airport director, James Patterson, arrived in a panic, immediately trying to save his own skin. "Director Martinez, we had no idea Mr. Whitfield's behavior had escalated to this level." "You had 17 formal complaints," Director Martinez replied coldly, holding up the file. "You had multiple documented incidents from your own staff. You didn't have no idea. You chose to ignore it. Now you have a federal civil rights investigation on your hands and potential criminal charges against your entire management team." As Agent Walsh prepared to transport Thorne for federal booking, the litany of charges was read out. Evidence tampering, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, civil rights violations under color of authority, and potentially dozens of other charges related to his long and sordid pattern of discriminatory behavior. "Mr. Thorne," she said, as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law." As the Miranda rights were read, Markham Thorne finally understood that his 8-year reign of racist terror was over. The federal government was taking this case personally, and Dr. Elias Vance, the man he had tried to destroy, would be the star witness who would ensure that Thorne faced the full and devastating consequences of his crimes. The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was already certain. Markham Thorne's career in airport security was finished forever. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Chicago was packed to the rafters as Markham Thorne faced the final chapter of his self-inflicted downfall. The case had become a national sensation, a landmark prosecution for civil rights violations in transportation security that would set legal precedents for years to come. U.S. District Judge Patricia Morrison, a woman known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor, read the verdict with the gravity it deserved. Mr. Thorne, on the charges of evidence tampering, filing a false police report, interference with a federal investigation, violation of civil rights under color of authority, and conspiracy to violate civil rights, this court finds you guilty on all counts. Thorne, no longer the swaggering tyrant of the terminal, but a shrunken, broken man in an ill-fitting suit, slumped in his chair. His legal team had thrown every possible defense at the wall, but the evidence had been an avalanche. The crystal-clear security footage, the damning testimony from over a dozen witnesses, the multiple cell phone recordings, and the meticulously documented pattern of discrimination had left the jury with no other choice. The evidence presented in this case, Judge Morrison continued, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom, paints a disgusting picture of a systematic pattern of racial discrimination, a pattern that violates the most fundamental principles of equal treatment under the law. Mr. Thorne, you were entrusted with a position of public authority, and you abused that trust to target innocent travelers based solely on the color of their skin. Dr. Elias Vance sat in the gallery, having provided 3 days of calm, professional, and utterly devastating testimony. He had recounted the events not with anger, but with a chilling precision that had methodically dismantled every lie and excuse Thorne's defense had tried to construct. The lead prosecutor, Sarah Carter, had built a case as solid as granite. She had presented evidence of Thorne's years-long campaign of harassment, the unauthorized evidence locker entries, the glaring statistical disparities in his detentions, and the management cover-up that had allowed it all to fester. Your Honor, she had argued in her closing statement, this was not a single moment of poor judgment. This was a deliberate, sustained campaign of racial hatred that culminated in the defendant committing a series of serious federal crimes against a federal inspector. Mr. Thorne, Judge Morrison said, her eyes boring into him, you will serve a sentence of 8 years in a federal penitentiary, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. Furthermore, you are hereby permanently banned from any employment in transportation security, law enforcement, or any other position of public authority for the remainder of your life. A sob broke from Thorne's wife in the gallery. His teenage children sitting beside her refused to even look at their father. The man who had once strutted through O'Hare like a king was now just another convicted felon being led away in handcuffs. But the criminal conviction was only the beginning. The fallout from Thorne's actions was systemic and far-reaching. The Department of Transportation imposed a crippling $2.3 million fine on Chicago O'Hare for its systematic civil rights violations. Airport Director James Patterson and 3 other senior executives were fired. The entire security training program was scrapped and rebuilt from the ground up, under strict federal oversight. The civil lawsuit, filed by Elias and 17 other passengers who had been targeted by Thorne over the years, resulted in a massive $15 million settlement. But more importantly, it forced the airport to implement comprehensive reforms that would protect countless future travelers. Maria Santos, who had been promoted to airport director in the wake of the management purge, introduced new protocols that quickly became the national standard. The new training program developed in response to the case was officially named the Vance Protocol, in honor of Elias's professionalism and courage. It mandated intensive implicit bias training, de-escalation techniques, and strict, transparent documentation procedures for every single security interaction. Elias himself had been promoted to Regional Director of Inspections for the entire Midwest. He now traveled the country, not just inspecting runways and equipment, but implementing the new standards his own harrowing experience had helped create. "The goal isn't just to prevent what happened to me," he stated during his testimony before a congressional committee. "The goal is to create a system where every single traveler, regardless of their background, is treated with dignity and respect." The case became a model for prosecuting discrimination in other federal agencies. The passenger videos that had captured Thorne's crimes went viral, sparking a national conversation about racial profiling and the abuse of power. Robert Hayes, the businessman whose phone recording had been so crucial, became a vocal advocate for passenger rights. Markham Thorne's name became a byword for everything wrong with discriminatory security practices. His case was studied in law schools, police academies, and civil rights seminars. The airport that had once enabled his bigotry was now a national model for inclusive, effective security. The man he had tried to destroy had become a national hero. Justice hadn't just been served. It had planted the seeds of lasting, meaningful change that would protect innocent travelers for generations to come. 2 years after Markham Thorne's conviction, Chicago O'Hare was a different place. It was a symbol of how an institution, when forced to confront its ugliest truths, could not only change but become better, stronger, and more just. Dr. Elias Vance stood at a podium in the very same terminal where he had been humiliated and framed. But this time, he was there as the keynote speaker for the National Transportation Security Conference. The irony was lost on no one. The man Thorne had tried to ruin was now training the nation's top security personnel. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Elias told the assembled directors of security from across the country. "But it does happen. It happens when good people decide that they will no longer accept discrimination as the cost of doing business." The statistics told the story. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment at O'Hare had dropped by a staggering 94%. The Vance Protocol had been implemented at over 300 airports nationwide, creating a new, standardized approach to bias-free security. Markham Thorne remained in federal prison, a forgotten footnote in a story that was no longer about him. The real victory wasn't his downfall. It was the systemic change his crimes had inadvertently catalyzed. Passengers of color could now travel with a little less fear, families with a little less worry. The case had inspired reforms far beyond aviation. The ripple effects of one man's courage in the face of profound injustice had touched millions of lives. Elias's story had become proof that the system, as flawed as it is, can work when people demand that it does. His calm professionalism in the face of raw, racist hatred had shown the immense power of maintaining one's dignity while fighting for what is right. "The question isn't whether discrimination exists," Elias said in his closing remarks, his voice resonating with the quiet power that had become his trademark. "We know it does. The question is, what do we do when we witness it? Do we stay silent, or do we speak up? Do we accept it as normal, or do we demand better?" The audience rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation, but Elias's real satisfaction came from a deeper place. It came from knowing that somewhere, right at that moment, a family was walking through an airport, being treated with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. And now I want to ask you again. Have you ever witnessed something you knew was wrong, but you weren't sure what to do? Have you seen someone being treated unfairly because of their race, their religion, or just the way they look? The story of Elias Vance proves that speaking up matters. Recording what you see matters. Demanding accountability matters. Share your own experiences in the comments below. If you've witnessed an act of discrimination, tell us what happened. If you've been part of a positive change in your own community, share that story too. Like this video if you believe in equal treatment for everyone, and please subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who fight for justice and, against all odds, win. Because when we stand together against hatred and discrimination, we all become safer, we all become stronger, and we all get a little closer to the world we deserve.